I have previously made a video, The Story of Haru. This forms part of the bigger Osiris myth, which one source claims to be the most elaborate and influential story in ancient Egyptian mythology. There are several sources of the Osiris myth, including the Pyramid Text, the Coffin Text, the Book of the Dead, Herodotus' Histories, Diodorus Siculus' Bibliotheca Historica, Plutarch on Isis and Osiris, and a few others, even on temple walls. Here is the story of Osiris.
The name Osiris was the Greek form of the Egyptian user, and the Greeks identified him with their own deities of the underworld, Dionysus and Hades. Osiris is represented as a man wrapped in a mummy binding, holding in his crossed arms the ceremonial crook and flail. On his head, he wears the tall white crown of Upper Egypt. Often his skin is colored green, which symbolized regeneration and growth. In the beginning, Osiris was a vegetation god governing the death and rebirth of the crops. Later he became associated with the death of humans, and so as a funerary deity, he was one of the most adored and popular of all Egypt's gods. When Osiris was born, beautiful singing was heard in the heavens, and a loud voice called out proclaiming, "Now has come the Lord of all things," rejoicing could be heard throughout the land. The hearts of the people were gladdened, and rumor spread along both banks of the Nile that a great and wise pharaoh had been born amongst them. According to the Egyptian legend, Osiris was once a pharaoh upon the earth. His rule following those of Ari, his grandfather, and Geb, his father. Before the reign of Osiris, the tribes of Egypt were nomadic hunters, constantly at war with each other as they traveled up and down the Nile Valley. With his sister Aset, Isis, as his queen, Osiris went around making peace between his people. First, he taught them the arts of agriculture and instructed them in the manufacturing of agricultural tools and implements. He showed them how to grow crops of wheat and then how to grind it for baking bread. They then learned how to raise vines to make wine, and in areas unsuited for grape production, Osiris taught them how to brew beer from barley. Osiris also founded temples and had them decorated with fine carving statues and paintings. He formulated the rituals of worship and religious practices, encouraging his people to live noble and upright lives, constructed towns, and provided the citizens with just laws. When he was satisfied that his kingdom was at peace and that his people led contented and meaningful lives, he went from Egypt, traveling abroad with Thoth, Anubis, and Wapowet to make peace with the rest of the world. Behind him, he left his queen Isis to rule in his place. Set, Osiris' brother, was envious of the position and power of Isis and sought to take the throne for himself. Isis, however, was wise and strong, and she quickly defeated his rebellion, as Set was the brother of both Isis and Osiris. He escaped punishment and was allowed to keep his freedom. Osiris brought many lands under his rule, not by violence and the force of arms, but by gentleness and persuasion. His army marched to the sound of joyful songs and the playing of sweet music, not the chants of war and the clash of spears against shields. Only after bringing the benefits of returning to Egypt. Once back in Egypt, he found the land prosperous and peaceful under civilization. To the whole of the earth did Osiris' mind turn to thought of home and the wise and loving care of Isis. After a time, jealousy again surged in his brother's heart, and aided by 70 of her people, he waited for his chance. And quietly Set planned his destruction. He formed an alliance with the queen of Ethiopia. Using secretly obtained measurement of the dimensions of the Osiris body, Set had a rich chest fashioned and decorated with great skill and artistry. Such was its size and shape that it would only accommodate the pharaoh's body. Once the chest was completed, Set held an elaborate feast in honor of Osiris' reign. Apart from Osiris, the only other guests were his own conspirators. At the feast, the chest was brought before the assembled company with great show and ceremony. It was greeted with cries of delight and shouts of admiration. Set promised that it should be a gift to whosoever it would fit and offered Osiris the chance to be the first to try. Unsuspecting Osiris climbed into the box. As soon as he lay within its confines, the conspirators seized their chance and, slamming down the lid, nailed it firmly in place and sealed the cracks with molten lead. The chest had become a deadly coffin. With Osiris' family entombed, Set had the chest carried to the mouth of the Nile and cast into the sea. News of fate of Osiris came to the ears of Isis, and she immediately went out to find his body, for she knew the dead could not rest until they received the proper burial with the correct rites and ceremonies. She searched, asking all she met for news of her husband, however none were able to help. Eventually, her searching carried her to the point where the Nile met the sea. There she saw children playing, and they told her that the chest had been cast adrift by Set. Consulting visions, Isis discovered further details of the whereabouts of her husband's body. The chest, she was told, had been washed ashore on the coast of Byblos in Phoenicia and rested for a while amongst the branches of a tamarisk bush. Encouraged by the drive of the deity which it held, the bush grew rapidly, becoming a trunk commanded that a pillar be made to support the roof of the royal palace. In this, and his queen saw the tree and were highly impressed. They had it cut down and from its mighty tree and forming solid trunk about the chest. The ruler of Byblos, King Mercator's position, it released such a sweet odor that its fame spread far and wide. Isis left Egypt and traveled to Byblos. Once there, she sat at a fountain that was situated outside the king's residence. There she remained, speaking to no one except her own handmaidens. Isis was very kind to them. She would braid their hair, tying it with great immediately aroused, and she summoned Isis to the palace and was so impressed by her mistress they told her of their meeting with the strange woman. The queen's curiosity was killed and perfumed them with the sweet fragrance of her own breath, returning to their skills that she gave her the position of nurse to one of her young sons. Rumor spread around the palace, however, of the strange practices of the new nurse. It was told that each shadow hour she would wait until all had retired. Once all was quiet, she would enter the great hall and build up the fire into a raging furnace. When the flames were at their highest, she would plunge the prince in amongst them, after which she would change herself into a swallow and fly around the great pillar, singing sorrowfully as if mourning for a lost loved one. News of this came to the notice of the queen, who, fearing for the safety of her child, went out to find if the story were true. Concealing herself in the great hall, she waited for shadow hours to fall. Then, just as she had been told, Isis came forth and, after building up the fire, cast the child into the flames. With a scream, the queen sprang from her hiding place and pulled the child from the fire. Isis turned to her and corrected her roughly, explaining that by her foolish and quick action she had robbed her son of eternal life. Isis went on to explain her true identity to the surprised queen and exposed the events that had led to her coming to Byblos. Finally, she begged that she might be given the pillar that supported the roof of the palace. When the pharaoh heard of the goddess' presence, he did all that he could to make her welcome and was quick to grant her request. The pillar was carefully removed and the chest cut out from its heart. Isis had the chest carried aboard a ship and sailed back to Egypt, accompanied by Maneros, the pharaoh's eldest son, while the remains of the tree that she left behind were anointed with myrrh and worshipped and venerated by the Babylonians as a holy relic. During the voyage, Isis found that she could no longer keep from opening the coffin, so raising the lid she gazed upon Osiris' cold face and kissed his still lips, tears falling on him from her eyes. Wondering what great secret the chest contained, Maneros came up behind her, but when she heard him she turned around in anger, and the brightness of her tear-reddened eyes burnt his flesh and caused him to fall dead on the deck. In the meantime, as Isis had been searching for the body of Osiris, Set had taken the vacant throne of Egypt under his rule. The supporters of Osiris were persecuted and injustice prevailed. When Isis returned to the land of Egypt, Set's followers hunted her as a fugitive, driving her to seek refuge in the dark swamps of the delta. However, her grandfather, saw her plight from his seat in the heavens and sent Anubis to be her guide. Isis hid the body of Osiris from the eyes of Set. However, while he was out hunting, one shadow hour by moonlight found her hiding place. Recognizing the chest, he opened it and had the body of Osiris removed and cut into 14 pieces, which were cast into the Nile in hopes that the crocodile would devour them and thus deny Osiris eternal life. Yet because of their love for Osiris and their fear of the wrath of Isis, the crocodile did not eat the flesh of the god, and the pieces were carried by the waters of the Nile and cast upon the banks, all that is except the phallus, which was consumed by a fish of the species of oxorchid. When Isis discovered Set's evil deed, she was filled with greater sorrow than before. Accompanied by her sister Nephthys, she sailed down the Nile searching out the scattered parts of Osiris' body. According to one version of the story, tells that the deities Anubis and Thoth descended from heaven to assist Isis and Nephthys. Together they took the separate parts of the body and made Osiris whole again, then wrapped him in bandages of a mummy. Isis took the form of a kite and used her wings to blow air into his nostrils, restoring his soul to life and making it free to depart into the other world. Still in the form of a bird, she came to rest on the body of her dead husband, and using her magic she conceived their son Horus. For many years Set reigned and Isis remained in hiding with her son. In time Horus grew strong and well practiced in the art of combat, waiting for the day when he would be strong enough to avenge his father's death. Among the swamps of the delta, Horus raised an army comprised of the faithful followers of his father and those who hated Set for his wrongdoing. The angry hawk of the sun glared down from their banners of war. Then, following a sign from his father which was revealed to him in a dream, Horus called his army to his side and marched to battle. Set assembled his forces and drew them up in lines of battle on the field of Edfu. His army was strong, but that of Horus was increased when many of Set's own warriors, still faithful to Osiris and Isis, broke from the ranks and joined Horus. Following a bitter and bloody struggle, Horus won the field. Set was driven forth in confusion, and the conquerors pursued him up to the eastern borders of Egypt. Finally, he sought to make a stand at Asaru. Gathering the remnants of his force, he prepared to meet the army of Horus once again. The fighting at Asaru was fierce. The killing lasted many days, and the mounds of the dead grew high with broken bodies. Beneath the circling vultures, Horus and Set fought with all their might, both suffering many wounds, and when for a brief moment the two stood face to face, the sound of their cries of rage shook the earth and caused those around them to quake with fear. The gods fought ruthlessly, cutting and slashing. Heedless to pain, Set was driven back as the great strength of Horus began to show, and taking advantage of a moment break, he escaped to the ranks of his supporters. But for all his powers, the hawk god had lost the right eye to the hand of Set, which became known as Aset. Eventually Set was overcome, and the last defeated and bloody remains of his once proud army fled across the border and out of Egypt. Thoth came down from heaven and healed the wounds of both combatants. Then Set was summoned to appear before council of gods to answer for his crimes. They passed judgment that Horus was the rightful Pharaoh of Egypt, and he became a well-loved ruler just as his father had been before him. Eventually, as time passed, Horus too became tired of earthly kingship and handed his throne to a human successor. From then on, the rule of the gods upon earth was ended. Thereafter, kings took the name Horus throughout their lives, and after death they took the name Osiris. Indeed, when a pharaoh died, his heir would add authority to his claim to the throne by assuming the title of Horus, presiding over the burial of the deceased Osiris. This practice was followed when succession was direct from father to son, yet could also be used to legitimize the ascendance to the throne of those not of royal descent. For instance, although not of royal blood, assumed the title of Horus and conducted the rituals of burial. When Tutankhamun died without male offspring, he was followed by his uncle I, who for his nephew, which was the basis of his claim to the throne.
That completes the story of Osiris. This text is taken from Ancient Egypt and the Pharaohs by the master teacher Dr. Malachi Z. York, page 210 to 213. Be sure to check out my debut book, Black Egyptians, The African Origins of Ancient Egypt, for a complete understanding of Egyptian history, or my long-awaited book, Egypt, End of the Black Dynasties. Shogun Starchild, Black Egyptians, you cannot stop my fate.